Welcome to today's Explainer. We're diving right into an incredibly fascinating story, and I actually want you to picture a very specific scene to start us off. It's early 1912. Imagine we're stepping right into the parlor of a home in San Francisco, and we're pulling up a chair next to a 75-year-old man. His name is Elijah Pickrell McKnew, and he's sitting there looking back on an absolutely extraordinary American life. He's finally decided it's time to tell his grandchildren exactly how he got there, passing down a century-old memoir that we are going to explore together today.
Look at the vivid imagery Elijah uses right off the bat to describe his own aging. He writes, "I can feel the years settling into my bones like river gravel into a sluice box." This isn't just some poetic turn of phrase. This is the literal, everyday language of a man who spent his youth hunched over, separating heavy gold from gravel in the California gold rush. It hooks you right in, doesn't it? From his very first sentence, he's telling us that his history is literally tied to the earth and the rivers of the American West.
So, let's start at the beginning. Section 1, A Restless Youth, from Maryland to the Military. Looking at his timeline, Elijah's story actually starts far, far away from the gold fields. He was born in the green, rolling tobacco farms of Prince George's County, Maryland, back in 1836. But, skipping down to 1845, when he was just 9 years old, his mother Frances passed away. And he points to this specific tragedy as the defining spark of his restlessness. There was no time to grieve back then. He just had to carry that sadness with him. By 1855, that pent-up restlessness pushed him to make what he called the greatest mistake of his entire life, an impulsive enlistment in the U.S. Army's 1st Dragoons. He absolutely hated the rigid discipline of this strict cavalry unit. He hated it so much, in fact, that just a year later, in January 1856, he deserted and fled west.
That brings us to Section 2, Fleeing West for Gold and the Tuolumne County Hardships.
Once he managed to survive the totally grueling overland journey to California, he had a new problem. He had to hide. The Army had a very long memory, and desertion was a major crime, especially with the Civil War brewing on the horizon. So look at how he registers himself in the 1860 census here. Elijah Pickrell, minor. He strategically dropped his last name, McKnew, and just used his mother's maiden name to blend in. It was a surprisingly simple disguise, but hey, it worked as he chased the tail end of the gold rush.
Now, we so often romanticize the gold rush, right? We think of overnight riches and striking it big. Well, Elijah's reality was far from that. It was pure, unadulterated physical misery. Every single day, he had to rise before dawn when the mountain creeks were at their absolute coldest. He'd crouch down, fill his pan with heavy gravel, and swirl it in freezing water until his feet went totally numb and his back just ached. And the reward for all that agony? Usually it was just a tiny, microscopic glint of yellow gold dust hiding in a pile of black sand.
This comparison brilliantly illustrates his relentless work ethic. He eventually went from the agonizingly slow, freezing work of the gold pan on the left to operating the heavy wooden rocker box you see on the right. Elijah and his mining partner Lewis Pratt would operate this cradle together, shoveling and rocking several cubic yards of gravel a day. It was absolutely brutal on the back, and it left their hands completely raw. Now, Elijah never hit a major strike. He never became rich, but this steady, stubborn labor kept him fed, housed, and most importantly to him, it kept him free.
Let's move to Section 3 and see how this transitions into his next chapter, building a San Francisco family from the gold fields to the city.
The solitary freedom of the mountains eventually lost its appeal for Elijah, and that was largely because of the remarkable woman you see here, Jane Whittle. She was an Australian immigrant who actually arrived in California as a child. By the time Elijah met her, she'd already lost her father, her mother was ailing, and she was basically working herself half to death caring for her sister's kids. Yet, Elijah noted her quiet, steady courage and remarkable grace through it all. They married in 1865. She was 18 and he was 29.
Now, when I was reading his memoir, this next number literally stopped me in my tracks. 12. That is the staggering number of children Elijah and Jane had together over the years, and 11 of them survived to adulthood. As you can probably imagine, scraping by in gold country just couldn't support a family of that massive size anymore. The easy gold was long gone. So in 1876, Elijah made the pivotal decision to pack up the whole shebang and move the family to San Francisco to find better opportunities to feed all those hungry mouths. And in San Francisco, Elijah was the definition of doing whatever it takes to survive. Looking at his work history here, he labored as a teamster, urging heavy wagons and horses up those famously steep San Francisco hills in the rain and fog.
He hustled seasonal produce from street carts. He even worked as an oysterman to meet the massive 1890s demand for fresh oysters. He proudly stated that he never considered any honest work beneath him. And you know what? It paid off. Through sheer force of will and endless labor, by 1910, Elijah owned his home at 4313 19th Street, free and clear. No mortgage, just complete hard-earned security.
But actually, before we get to 1910, we have to talk about Section 4, the 1906 Great Earthquake, April 18th, dawn. Imagine this. You're 70 years old. You're fast asleep in the home you've worked decades to secure. Suddenly, without warning, the plaster falls, the chimney cracks, windows shatter everywhere. The violence of the earthquake striking their home was jarring, sudden, and absolutely terrifying. Elijah describes it with this terrifying, sensory-rich detail. He said it didn't sound like thunder, but rather a grinding, tearing roar from beneath the earth itself. He said the house bucked like a horse trying to throw its rider. Suddenly, this old man was thrust into the ultimate test of protecting his large family.
The contrast here is just mind-blowing. On the macro scale, downtown San Francisco was rapidly turning into a massive wall of fire, literally consuming decades of city building. But then, zoom into the intimate micro view. Down on 19th Street, Elijah Jane and their kids absolutely refused to panic. They literally went back into their crumbling house, carried out their stove, their photo albums, and their family Bible, and just sat calmly on the cobblestones watching the inferno approach.
That devastating fire swept through the city, destroying pretty much everything in its path. But it stopped exactly 1 block away from them. The wind shifted. Their house, number 4131, was miraculously spared. And that number became a lasting symbol for them, a symbol of their family's survival, their stubbornness, and their ultimate triumph over disaster. Which brings us to the final chapter of our explainer, Section 5, A Grandfather's Final Lessons, Wisdom from 1912.
As Elijah feels his time drawing to a close, he distills his whole life down to its deepest emotional anchor. He writes this to his grandchildren: "Take care of your grandmother. Take care of each other." His immense gratitude for Jane, his incredibly capable, steady wife of 47 years, just shines right through. He tells them he can hear her in the kitchen, calling it the background music of his life, and tasks his grandchildren with protecting her.
He also leaves them with these 5 core life lessons, and honestly, they are just as applicable to us today as they were a century ago. First, work hard and honestly. There is true dignity in all labor. Second, be stubborn about what matters, like staying to rebuild after a massive earthquake. Third, choose your partner wisely. Find someone steady who will stand right there with you when the fires come. Fourth, remember where you came from. Don't ever take the miracles of your present life for granted. And finally, when the world turns hard, turn to each other. Family matters.
Elijah Pickrell McKnew passed away just a few weeks after writing this, in April 1912. He wasn't a famous general, and he certainly wasn't a millionaire gold baron. He was a runaway soldier, an unsuccessful miner, a teamster, and a father. Yet his stubborn endurance built a family that survived and thrived through earthquakes and intense hardship. So I want to leave you with this provocative question to chew on. What legacy will you leave behind? Because as Elijah's entire story proves, you don't need to strike gold to leave an extraordinary, lasting mark on history. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope it sparked your curiosity as much as it did mine.